Trust has really been largely defined by opening 2 new communities. We opened Floor 401 Lofts virtually 2 weeks ago and welcomed 99 of our previously unhoused neighbors home. And it's been so inspiring to see and work with all of our funding and development partners, as well as our teams in the field, and to see how, you know, energized everyone has been to open a new community. And Sierra and her team did a phenomenal job bringing that online, you know, during a pandemic. We're lucky today to have the architect of Floor 401 as one of our panelists, Brian Lane. Tomorrow, we are opening another community virtually, and 649 Lofts will welcome 55 of our previously unhoused neighbors home and be home to LA Christian Health Center's Joshua House Clinic, and serving 7,000 people a year in a 25,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility that we're all very excited, you know, about the possibility of transforming public health response in Skid Row to future crises. Sierra and Lee had a pretty visible month. Sierra was a panelist on the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing Planning Around Local Politics panel, April 8th. Turns out that was a pretty prescient title, given what happened in our space this month. And planning around local politics is something that is very much uppermost, I know, in everyone's mind. She's appearing tomorrow on a Novogradac panel. And Lee appeared at Own It, which is a USC event addressing gender equity in schools, workforce, and society by lifting up women leaders throughout those spaces. We're also proud to be a finalist for LA Business Journal's 2021 Nonprofit of the Year Award. So it was an exciting month here. You know, we have a lot going on, and our spring fundraising campaign will start immediately following the opening for 649 Lofts tomorrow. So you'll be hearing a lot about that in the next month. The thing everybody has on their mind in our space is Judge Carter's orders in the LA Alliance for Human Rights versus the City and County of Los Angeles case. And we've had so much interest and activity, and I know so many of you are following it closely. I have to say, you know, there's so much of the order and the case itself that's just central to our DNA. It's fundamentally unacceptable that we have 68,000 of our neighbors unhoused and suffering and dying in the streets. And the judge has written very beautifully about the how that came to pass, and outlined the long history of systemic inequity and racism that have contributed to the current situation. This is a confusing moment. Everybody, I think, has more questions than answers, or they certainly should have more questions than answers. It has the potential to be a transformative moment. There is a lot of interest in defending and advocating for the permanent housing pipeline, not just permanent supportive housing, but affordable housing generally. There's obviously risk to our pipeline with the initial order as it was written, and the appetite to claw back or otherwise rearrange Triple H. There's also tremendous opportunity for the trust in terms of revenue diversification opportunities and expanding our service model. And so we're really all working very closely with other service providers and developers and leaders to understand this and to lean into this really landmark moment for us and for everyone who aspires to end homelessness in Los Angeles. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Sierra Adelano, our Chief Real Estate and Investment Officer. Sierra, as you just heard, is having a really big month. She's opening new communities and, you know, an in-demand panelist, and she has a terrific panel today of people who have unique and innovative solutions in this space that are much, much needed. And so with that, I would like to thank all of our teams and board members who are on the line today, and lift up everyone's hard work and turn it over to Sierra.
Thanks, everyone. I want to make sure everyone can hear me. Having some difficulties with my sound. Well, welcome. I think, Jack gave a beautiful update on what's going on at Skid Row and what's going on in Skid Row specifically for the month. It's been very exciting and in a lot of ways, and we're hoping to see some change on the horizon. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists that we are speaking with today. And I just want to say thank you guys for taking the time to come out and speak with us. Our panelists that we have today are Brad Padden, apologies, the CEO of Housing Diversity, and Faisal Roble, for the Chief Equity Officer from the LA City Planning, and Brian Lane, the Principal of Koning Eizenberg Architecture. Recognizing the severe undersupply of attainable housing in the core of urban neighborhoods, Brad Padden brought his innovative business approach to Seattle. With his partners, Brad has assembled a portfolio of 473 beautifully designed apartments in the core of Seattle neighborhoods through adaptive reuse, repositioning, and ground-up construction. He has an additional 1,440 apartments under construction and permitting across various parts of Seattle and Los Angeles. Brad is a co-founder of New Apartments and Oz Navigator, as well as the CEO and founder of Housing Diversity and sponsor of numerous other projects currently under construction. Brad's commitment to efficient housing and healthy communities includes preservation, seismic upgrading, and adaptive reuse of existing buildings in urban centers. This passion led Brad to become involved in Seattle's 2030 district, whose goal is to foster deep energy retrofits of existing buildings. He also co-founded the Alliance for Safety, Affordability, and Preservation, an advocacy group that is creating a plan and funding path to bring 1,445 seismically vulnerable, unenforced masonry buildings in Seattle up to modern safety standards. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you.
Is the largest department in the United States. Named Faisal Roble, the first Chief Equity Officer, a newly created position to spearhead racial justice efforts within the department. This role also helps address implicit bias in the city planning policies and outreach. Roble has a robust history in serving various community groups around Los Angeles. His experience includes managing Visions of Southeast and West Adams, Baldwin Hills, Lamert communities. Part of his work helped address racial injustice, equity, as well as economic disinvestment. His leaders in over 20 projects have helped bolster affordable housing and sustainable communities. Most recently, he oversaw projects of significant importance to South LA communities, including the redevelopment of Jordan Downs from 700 units of public housing into 1,073 units, mixed-use, mixed-income neighborhoods with full-service grocery store, commercial and community services, and more than 5 acres of parks and open space. A graduate of the University of California, Los Angeles, Faisal has been in principal city planner in the city of Los Angeles and has been a recipient of top medals, international awards, letters, certificates of appreciation. In addition to 30 years of professional planning experience, he has graduate degrees in regional and urban planning, as well as Afro-American studies and emphasis on urban political economy. Welcome. Brian Lane, a principal of Koning Eizenberg Architecture, uses a keen eye for detail and focus on what is to be a good neighbor to raise the bar on expectations for community architecture. Brian fuses practical knowledge and design of constructability to anchor experimentation across a range of budget. He draws upon planning knowledge and strong visualization skills to assist cities and agencies and is a member of Hollywood Sign Board of Trustees. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll begin by moderating some questions in and around our discussion. Brian, there's been a shift from original concept of SRO hotel units to current model of ground up new construction. What inspired this need to change and innovate the permanent housing model?
Thanks, Sierra. It's great to be here. It's funny. I started doing affordable housing work actually before I went back to graduate school, so about 1988 or so. And back in '88, we were basically doing adaptive reuse projects in existing buildings. We were taking they were already SRO type housing in some cases. They were these buildings that had, light wells and small little rooms and bathrooms down the hall and things from literally leftovers from the 30s and 40s. And we did numerous projects like that. And even Koning Eizenberg did a ground up SRO when we first started working with you guys. And I think that was probably the early 90s by the time that happened. As the affordable housing space kind of continued to grow, I think what really drove it was the idea that individual units with kitchens and bathrooms provided the most equity, the most dignity, and it kind of upped the game a little bit. And it really, when you think about it from an equity standpoint, that is ultimately, you want your own kitchen and bathroom. I mean, so many people that we talk to, once they move into these projects, that is everything to them. So that really, it's equitable, and the dignity factor is huge. And I think that is what propelled it. I also think, and you would probably know a little more than me, but from a management standpoint and the population served, it was easier to manage people when they had their own units and had their own kitchens and bathrooms rather than to have a lot of sharing going on. So I think that's what drove it. And we have progressed, from there, looking at all different types of ways to make studios and smaller units have all the amenities that you would find, definitely everything you find in market rate units, and even more, I would say now. We have a very heightened level of ADA accessibility type of things that, we're all working with, and the projects are fully accessible, and even probably more than market rate projects in some extent. So I think that's what kind of drove it. That said, it is kind of interesting in the recent developments and the emergency state that we're in right now, in trying to just get people off the street. There are groups that are looking at other models, and some have gone back to SROs, or say we updated the Simone a few years ago, and the Simone was an SRO hotel, but what we did when we came back and updated is, even though there were not bathrooms in the units and there were not kitchens, we tried to create this cabinet that had a cooking facility in it, and it started to put some of that, back to the single individual apartment type of studio feel. But I think there are people that are, everything's on the table right now, and it kind of has to be. I think, we have some really well proven models that we continue to innovate with new technologies, whether it's mass timber or modular and all that kind of thing. But and we continue to, develop those. But I think we're also there are some people that are looking at co-housing models. Those don't work for a lot of supportive housing providers, but there are people that are doing them. There are some people that are, the tiny homes thing, but that's more of a temporary model. So kind of everything's kind of out there. And I think that's usually what I see when we're in a crisis mode. You just kind of have to pull way back and look at all the tools you have available, because you're really trying to treat the condition with a lot of different solutions. So I'm seeing all of that right now.
Agreed. Anytime you're in crisis mode, it's what can we bring to the table to find solutions? And I think those solutions are open to everybody right now. And this is, we need everyone's ideas, and we need people to be innovators and to step out on the ledge and say, okay, let me try this and let me learn from it, right? It's not always a great experience, but it is about learning and sharing that advice that, it's the failure and the success. It's not just one or the other.
That's very true.
And Brad, we have a long history of innovation at the Trust, and we're interested to see your particular contribution to market rate innovation. Housing Diversity Corporation calls itself the housing innovator, dedicated to providing a forward-thinking alternative to traditional apartment living in urban centers. Can you expand on this concept and share what it means to be a housing innovator?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the Skid Row Trust for putting this together. And it's such an honor to be here with all of you today. So, you know, innovation in housing, as Brian said, comes in a lot of different forms. And you know, for me, thinking about housing, it was really kind of a all is old is new again kind of concept. So. The idea of SROs and small individual units was something that has been a part of our housing stock for centuries. I mean, you know, back in the Old West, the hotel above the saloon was a extended stay hotel for people that were kind of working in the community, and it served an important part of our housing stock for many years. And you know, over the last 40 to 60 years, the way that we think about housing and what a person needs to live and what that, like, there's been a lot of external influences looking down on the housing stock and trying to decide what's right, what's not right, how we should build it. And you know, in the end, it created a situation where, you know, everybody wanted bigger and bigger and bigger. And this created kind of a flow in that direction of larger and larger and larger is better. And now we're in a crisis where we can't afford to house everybody in a big apartment. So really my focus has been, how do we create affordability in a truly market rate environment? I, you know, being a newer entrepreneur at housing, I wasn't part of the establishment. So I was able to kind of look at housing from a completely different perspective. I'm a product guy, so I thought about housing as, you know, kind of a product we're producing and putting out into the market. And I was thinking about, like, how do we actually create something that adds value to the renter, to the investor, to the community, to the city? And really, for me, it was already there. It was these small apartments that, because of their size, it enabled us to get a lower price point. But it also increased the dollar per square foot on the actual construction, so we could afford to build it, because in the end it has to pencil all the way around. So our small apartments pencil from an investor standpoint, but also provide the lowest cost housing in the market, at, you know, 20 to 30% lower than the lowest price studios in any given kind of proximity to where we're building. And what we find is our smallest apartments that we produce, because we produce a range of small apartments from 200 square feet to 400 square feet. The ones that are the stickiest, the ones that lease the fastest, stay leased the longest, are our smallest apartments. Go figure, because they're the lowest price. And so there's this tremendous unmet need for these apartments that run, let's say in Seattle, at 50 to 80% of area median income is kind of the range on a naturally occurring basis that we're able to achieve, because the apartments are smaller, yet they're in these locations that are just like premium, high opportunity areas. So we're giving residents the ability to live more affordably in a very high opportunity area where they can walk to work, walk to fresh food, and have all the things that are so wonderful about living, you know, in downtown LA or in Hollywood, but at a price point that a much wider cross section of the city can afford. And that's really innovation to me in housing.
I would agree, and it's definitely a place where we see the need. That AMI range from, you know, really from anything above the affordability mark, so 61%, all the way up until 120% is where we're seeing, you know, across the country, that there is stock being taken away for either affordable housing or for market rate housing being built, and we're losing stock as well as not producing enough for that price point. So I think you've definitely found a niche and something that is needed for the area. And I commend you for the innovativeness, because it does take, you know, leaders to step out on the ledge and to experiment a bit. But it sounds like you did your research and it's working.
Yeah, and just one last comment. I'll just say, the cities around Southern California, the SCAG cities, they're coming to me and asking for how do we figure out how to meet our RHNA numbers, our regional housing needs assessment numbers in that particular range. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it is, and the penciling is the key. And I think it takes someone that's been on kind of the market rate side and the affordable side to really understand how to make that work. And it's a finite number to really get everything to pencil the right way to get it approved and processed and built. All right, Faisal, and correct me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. To understand how we've gotten to where we are at, it's important to understand the intersectionality between the role of land use, planning, structural racism, and the inequality that has perpetuated housing. Could you give a brief overview of on this from the Los Angeles City Planning's perspective?
Yes, thank you very much. So the entire concept of planning is really the product of law, land, and structural racism. I would say law because the oldest case of land use planning in the United States is that of Euclid versus Realty of Eugene, which really saw the concept of when do you segregate a given land use from, say, residential, whatever. Somebody may read that into a sort of a benign situation, but when you trace that 1800s case that went all the way to the US Supreme Court to today, you can see that segregating land also got carried over to every aspect of land use as of today. In a way, modern land use planning was born around 1920s. And Los Angeles is the first, if not the second, between LA and New York, that really codified its land use as back as 1920. That period coincides with the great Black migration from the South to America's urban cities that already had a concept of how to use land use planning to plan parks, open space, great housing stock, schools, what have you, for the white community. And Blacks were never being factored into. That really carried away. So when today we see the 68,000 unhoused people in Los Angeles that we are talking about, a minimum of 50% of that probably being Blacks. And then if you factor the rest of people of color, they will run even higher than that. That's not an accident. It's really part of the planning and land use ideology that we have carried between today and that period of 1920. If you look at the United States and our city has carried a deliberate policy of segregation, a very prominent one that really contributed to our housing crisis and the situation which are today, where people of color are overwhelmingly represented in the unhoused people. You need to look back at the GI Bill, which was an opportunity for those who defended America and came back to really take care of in terms of housing and other opportunities. That GI Bill literally solidified the segregation of our society into those who are better housed and those who are always on the margin, because Blacks and Latinx people coming back were literally barred from getting benefits from that GI Bill, which really solidified the white middle class to own picketed kind of housing in suburban America. That created the wealth disparity between people of color and whites, and that also created the burden of multi-generational housing overcrowdedness for people of color, in which case always there is one person to be kicked out or one person to lose their job and become easily unhoused. That being the foundation for where we are today, and the fact that structural racism really created the disproportionate number of unhoused people from the communities of color. The question is, how can we really address this issue? Can we really piecemeal it? Can the market take care of by itself, knowing that, as my precursor spoke about, people who develop land always are looking for the bottom line. And there are times that we recognize for what it is, in that sometimes this stock of housing for the unhoused people may not give the highest margin, maybe a little bit, and it's not as attractive. So two things that I will just address. Number one, the issue of unhoused people as a public health issue can no longer be taken care of by a small municipal government or by an architect who is innovative. Those can augment the work we are doing, but definitely we need somebody to do the heavy lifting, and that is both the federal government, the state, and the county. And I hope in this generation of President Biden's progressive agenda, the unhoused issue in every city, but in our particular city, Los Angeles, with the highest number, can factor into the making of his policy. That's number one. Number two, I think we need to start thinking about the unhoused people's neighborhoods, or where we want to put these people in a more community-oriented way. I think the first speaker touched that. Do we concentrate the unhoused people into the area that they are, which sometimes have benefits in the sense that their network is there, but at times it can also encourage other factors that we don't want. The whole planning concept pegs on the issue of job housing balance. I think if we start thinking about the unhoused people as communities like you and me, then we may need to think if we can place the unhoused units as part of the societal fabric, other than the concentration. And the reason why I'm saying so is, if we think that way, Los Angeles City will have abundant room to develop housing for this sector. And why I say abundant, because we have tons and tons of corridors in our city that just run vacant, or a tiny building from downtown Pico all the way to the coast, from Vermont, from Hollywood all the way to Watts. Those corridors are empty. They can contain densities that can literally really satisfy the RENA numbers that we are looking, particularly for the sector. So I think we need to start rethinking and, in a way, decentralize the housing for the unhoused and put them everywhere in the community so that they become part of the fabric. And as Brad said, they can have the opportunity to walk to a library, to walk to a park, and job and entertainment, and kind of bring them back to the normal life that we all seek. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you very much. I could listen to you on this topic for the entire hour that we're together, because it is essentially exactly everything that all of us on the call are dealing with as developers, and why we commit the long hours and the long amount of days. Have seen the need for a long period of time, and I commend you for stepping into the position that you're in, and understand that you have a heavy lift in your role to educate those that need to understand that this needs to come from a higher governmental source. Having done lots of meetings with communities to try to get approval for projects, I can tell you that it is, the NIMBYism that's out there is definitely race-based. It is not just based on income segregation, but it is racially motivated in every single one of those meetings that I've attended. And so it is going to be about education, and it is going to be about making people understand that everyone has these rights. Does not matter on the color of your skin or what has been in the law books historically, but it is really going to be about changing people's mindset and the concept of housing in general. So I just commend you for your work. Another question for you is, has the understanding of this intersectionality prompted change at the Los Angeles City Planning, and if so, how?
Yes, I think so. The mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, issued executive number 27 at the wake of the murder of George Floyd to basically finally recognize at the highest level of the department and the city in particular that racism, structural racism, and people get confused between somebody's thinking of race versus structural racism. I don't think we're talking about what I feel or somebody feels. We're talking about the structures that advise and oriented policy making. I think as a city, we came to realize that what we have been practicing has been empowering one sector of the society versus the other. So the biggest thing, as you say, is really to change our planning paradigm and come up with what we are calling transformative planning. Transformative planning will change the way we did planning, the way we involved communities, because in the past, although the doors were open, but it was always heavy, well-paid lawyers and consultants that took advantage of the process to make their points in front of planning commission and city council and what have you. Even our planners were less equipped in terms of the historical issues that surround. So basically, inside the planning department, we're writing a strategic equity ratios and equity planning that will really be the basis for how we approach planning. Some cities are even a bit advanced than us, such as Minneapolis, Minnesota, that completely wiped out single family zoning. The city of Seattle is linking its growth plan element with equity, so that every time you think about growth, and that's a city that's growing very fast, the issue of equity is filtered into the planning process. In our case, we are, as I speak, we are devising and designing our transformative planning that would speak to equity, that will advise all the plans that we have, from zoning to subdivision to the decision-making process of the commission, so that they will have an equity element to weigh every time that anybody is taking an action. We are revamping our findings, and we will include in the findings for project approval or disapproval an element of equity that will speak to all the issues that we are talking. A very good, interesting would be if a major project is to be built in downtown area, where we usually talk about the unhoused people, the issue of equity will literally put on that project on a checklist of what are you doing with the unhoused people? Is there an agreement with the community that speaks for that group? What are the development agreement around that issue or the public benefit? So we are developing that. In addition to that, we have about 10 lesson sessions that we have contracted with an outside consultant to first educate us, because even our planners are not educated. Everybody's coming from different point of view. It's you, myself, and somebody who has never really deliberated on this issue. We like to bring everybody to the center, so each and every planner would know the conditions of equity for approval as much as they know the conditions for zone change approval or for conditional use approval. So one is we put that as a foundation, I think we can probably push the agenda of equity in the field of planning to a level where we can probably have a more productive conversation with our developers. Our longer term include is to go out from the planning family and talk to groups like you or to people like Brad and those who develop, and make this not as a coercive measure, but as more of an educative kind of thing, so that everybody in the city who does housing, particularly the unhoused sector, more of a mind is meeting around this issue as opposed to bringing punitive. And we are devising that, and we will share with you as we go into that in detail.
We'd welcome those conversations. We have met with the planning department specifically around the 2040 plan that's devised, and I know that there's been a lot of communication back and forth regarding that specific plan. And as it was proposed, it brings up the perpetuation of poverty in and around Skid Row by limiting that whole sector to just affordable housing. And I think that what you're talking about, dispersing those that are unhoused throughout the community, is really the focus of something that we'd like to see in that plan, and that the Skid Row area is just not perpetuated and, for lack of a better term, redlined in that area, and that it is not allowed to flourish and to grow with the residents that it currently has. So I look forward to having those conversations with you and with the planning department, and giving some, perspectives, I think, from the development side of things, and an education both ways, because I think that that's definitely necessary. So Brad, you noticed that there was an undersupply of attainable housing in the core urban neighborhood and decided Seattle would be the place to start this transformation. Can you talk about what brought you to Seattle and explain the work that you did there and now in Los Angeles?
Yeah, so it was really kind of an interesting moment in time. I grew up in the shadow of Manhattan, New York City area. And throughout my childhood, I watched New York City go from being relatively affordable place to live to completely unaffordable. And the people that worked in New York City didn't have to make millions of dollars to live there. And then something changed over the last 40 years, right? It became more and more expensive to live in a city like New York City, and the economic diversity that made the city so exciting and so wonderful started to leave for Brooklyn, for Jersey, for North. They went everywhere because of price, right? Price was the core issue, and the real estate wasn't, it's a market-driven environment for real estate. What I found really interesting about Seattle was thinking about land use code changes in around 2010, 2011 that eliminated linking parking to unit count, and linking unit count and density to certain neighborhoods. So they really, through a transit-oriented legislation, kind of similar to the TOC legislation that Triple J brought to the state of California, Seattle saw that they had the foresight to create these opportunities for developers like me to help figure out what does it mean to innovate in housing, like that first question you asked. And how I interpreted it was, hey, now that the handcuffs are off and I can develop what the community really needs, what does the community really need? And what it needed was simply more housing units more quickly, full units, like Brian was saying, units that are beautifully built because they're small. We can get a fairly good dollar per square foot, so we can afford to fit them out, make them really nice. They're very dignified. And so Seattle was kind of the tip of the spear, if you will, because they were ahead of the curve in terms of liberalizing land use code. And they did that, again, through this urban village and frequent transit corridors. And Faisal said something really interesting earlier, which I definitely want to touch on, which is this idea of corridors and connecting areas of the city where there is a lack of density, but that they have the transit running down these spines. And so when I look at the TOC map of LA, and I'm concentrating on these high TOC tier 4 areas, there's very few of them because they have to be very, very close to a very high density transit area. But when you look and you expand that out to the TOC tier 3 areas, the TOC tier 3 areas follow a lot of those corridors that Faisal was talking about. So I envision in LA where the TOC legislation, it is also producing a large number of affordable units at the extremely low income. So this idea of having diverse communities spread throughout the city of LA that have people living in them that are making, under 30% of area median income, but you can't tell because you're just renting units and everybody's mixed and everybody's mingling and everybody's getting to know each other and share experiences. I mean, to me, that's what the beauty of this kind of housing diversity, this concept that my brand is built around, is really about. It's about economic diversity. It leads to racial diversity because more people can be included in these communities. That allows mixing and mingling of cultures that would ordinarily be very segregated just because I grew up in this neighborhood and I stuck with those people, and these other people grew up in this neighborhood and they've been around those people. And bringing everybody together, I think, is this kind of zeitgeist moment that we have here today. And the product for me is a manifestation of the opportunity to bring all those communities together in a very, very kind of, no one will know who is at the top and who's at the bottom. We have people earning $200,000 in our buildings and people earning $20,000. and nobody knows the difference. And to me, that is really everything about what we're trying to do with this kind of equity in housing at this moment in time.
Oh, great. I'm really excited to see some of your product come online, especially in Los Angeles. As you can hear, it's really needed, and I'm sure that's why you're here, is because you understand that need, in the community for housing, just like you described. So Brian, in permanent supportive housing architecture, what are some of the important innovations that you've noticed over time? And what is on your list that still needs to be done?
That's a lot. We have another hour. I'm kidding. So actually, I'm just going to tag on to a couple of things that Brad and Faisal said, because I think we're all onto this commercial corridor thing. Believe it or not, City of LA foresaw this as a potential zone change a long time ago, and they developed the RAS zone, the RAS 3 and 4. Those were they were just zoning classifications, unfortunately. They did not actually apply the zoning to the land. You had to get a zone change to use it. Subsequent, but the thinking along that was that most of these lots were C2 lots. They had 1.5 FARs. They were just super low density, but like you had this great commercial corridor infrastructure, and sometimes with services and other amenities around their stores and things. So anyway, TOC came along. It kind of subsumed that, and TOC has been a great, I would say an innovative policy. Taking it one further, though, I think I got to go back to zoning. We have to continue to work on zoning and how to incentivize certain things. Obviously, we've had the ADU ordinance, which has been extremely successful, and that has enabled some people to get a little more value out of their land and get some rent, or have a mother-in-law unit, or those kinds of things. We also had the small lot subdivision ordinance, which also had a tremendous amount of growth, and that was intended to put more missing middle housing units on the market. It did that to some degree. I think they were a little more expensive than most people had hoped, but it's still another tool that I think is one of the innovations in zoning. But if I'm kind of piggybacking on to the commercial corridor thing, one of the things I've always noticed is that a lot of those commercial corridors will have commercial lots, and then they have an R1 zone right along an alley or something. That R1 lot is incredibly compromised along that alley. It's the worst R1 lot. The next one in is kind of okay because you're buffered with an R1 lot. But the one on the alley, maybe we change zoning. Maybe we make a transition zone right there. That's something that transitions from these TOC projects that are now on the commercial corridor to something that has a little more density, and then finally goes into the R1. So I think we got to keep hitting the zoning thing in order to continue to open more housing possibilities. Other things like SB 330, things that start to streamline us, I think are things we continue to have to innovate. One quick example, I was talking to someone about modular not long ago, and we were talking about, the modular units themselves are approved up at the state, and there's, you get them approved within a month, let's say. But once we're down at the local level and trying to get those approvals, you're talking 6 to 9 months. And those things don't match, as far as like delivering the housing in a faster, more streamlined way. So I think we have to continue to work on streamlining things. And the city has been good in some of those levels, especially they have a designated person that is kind of case managing affordable housing permitting, and can kind of step in amongst the, all the departments that we get clearances from, and kind of hopefully work out the kinks when things don't quite match up. Other things I would say, and these are not so much however you want to take the term innovation, but for me, innovation is partly finding where all the broken parts are, the parts that kind of upset the system, and how we have to reform those in order to kind of move ahead in more efficient ways and to deliver projects. So streamlining is huge for me. I think whenever architects or developers, or we see things that are compromising our ability for producing density. In particular, right now, there was in Los Angeles for a while, DWP started to enforce a staging area on site, which was a huge piece of land on your property that they had to be able to pull their trucks in order to place a transformer. So sometimes you were going to lose like a dozen units by the time you accommodated this. So we got into that through the AIA and started to tackle that because we immediately saw that as an impediment that we needed to kind of get out of the equation. So I think those kinds of things are good. Same time, I think that what Brad does for market rate units is really progressive and it's really innovative. But I think if you were to try and get some of those units through some of the funding sources that you're typically dealing with, some of the things that they're able to do on those units, we would not be able to do. So if we're, say, for instance, making closets smaller or more efficient, or reducing refrigerators, even cooktops and things that kind of tend to make the units bigger because our funding sources have design guidelines, I think it's a good, maybe what Brad's doing, we need to evaluate that against some of the funding source guidelines that projects that come under like Skid Row Housing Trust does are falling under. I think that would be an interesting exercise, actually, because at the end of the day, we still have this big battle with the cost of the unit. The big thing that's out there that the public sees is an affordable unit costing $500,000, and unfortunately, that equation is way more complex than it ever gets portrayed in the media. Permanent supportive housing developers are providing many other resources to projects, whether they're the amenity, the supportive housing function with the case management and all those other things. Each additional bag of money, which is super well intended, does come with a fair amount of baggage, other things that you need to do in order to get that money. So I think we need to continue to look at those sources of funds and make sure we are streamlining and we're using them to the best benefit possible. I'm really encouraged by the innovation on the sustainability level that we've seen. I mean, almost at every level of sustainability, we are innovating constantly. So like PV panels are producing more watts per square foot than they were 7 years ago. We are able to get more out of what we can get on the roof. But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of other factors that might fight for that real estate up there. So whether you're talking to the fire department or you're talking to OSHA about facade access, but yet you're sort of whittling down your square footage that's available for PV and making your project more sustainable in the long term, we got to kind of balance those things at the same time, so that it's still safe, but yet we're not shooting ourselves in the foot. Even luckily, the panels are going up in more wattage, and maybe they'll continue to do that. But at the same time, we need all that power. So I love that kind of part of the innovation. Obviously, a lot of the affordable housing projects have taken great benefit on the reduction in parking and all of those kind of factors that we just don't want to put money into for permanent supportive housing, especially. Yeah, I think that's kind of. Did I get around it? Did I just circle back all over craziness? It is that kind of world, though, right? I think at the end of the day, it's never just one thing. I think architects and developers, we're dealing with so many different factors in the equation of housing. The end goal, however, is to produce more units of affordable housing and to do it more quickly. So, these dozens and dozens of things that affect what we do all have to be attacked simultaneously, coordinated, and done better. So
I agree.
Yep.
Faisal, you had something you wanted to add?
Yes, I think we have, in a way, from the plan department, it did probably enough, but we have to do more, but enough streamlining of projects all the way to designate an entire section now at the DSC to just handle and expedite housing cases, but still it's not enough, so we will do more. But I think I like to elevate the discussion a bit into more than the day-to-day functionality. When I was attending at UCLA about 32 years ago, Westwood was quasi-built. Today, if you go to Westwood and Beverly Center area, you won't recognize. But if you go to South LA and East LA, probably much hasn't changed. So I think, when we talk about, innovations and all that, we also need to factor the fact that there is bigger elephant in the house than the streamlining and the innovation, which in themselves are needed, and we did TOC, density bonus, permanent housing services, incentives are being given to developers to the max, and we're doing to a certain degree okay in some areas, not 100%. But I think we are lagging behind in terms of aligning our policy with the issue of equity. I mean, as I said, Westwood has changed completely. Well, I remember Ships used to be a building that was set on Westwood and Glendale, and all that corridor was literally quasi small buildings. Today, completely, that fabric is different. But South LA, East LA, some parts in the valley stayed the way they were 50 years ago. And we need to ask those questions like why? Thank you.
Yeah, the question of why is really where you start. Asking, how did we get here, and really going back into the history and what laws are preventing housing from being built in some of those areas, what other factors are presenting themselves, why developers are not building affordable housing in those areas. I can tell you from our point of view, it comes down to costs, most definitely. And how do we incentivize developers to where we offset some of those costs is, I think, where we need to start looking. But it is about, it starts at the fabric of it and what laws are in place in those cities. How can the planning department contribute to rezoning and things of that nature in and around those cities, that we can make housing for all and not just housing in certain areas. When you talk about equity in certain areas, you can clearly see how that gets perpetuated just on the factor of price, right? So right now, if you're an affordable housing developer or a market rate developer, you're looking at where can I buy land for the cheapest price to make the most amount of money, because that will give me the better product at the end of the day. Even if you're a nonprofit, it's not about profit at the end of the day, but it's about making your project feasible. And the only way to do that is to get these certain price points for land. And so as an affordable housing developer, we have this quasi, position that we're left in. And if you go and look for land right now for affordable housing, it is in those areas that there's already poverty in. So in order to bring affordable housing, you're only able to put it in those certain corridors. And I think that's where we have to look at on the innovative side, which is all we can do, because we're not lawmakers, we're developers, and we're trying to innovate, is look at how we can do some adaptive reuse in some of those areas, especially after coming out of COVID. Are there buildings that were commercial buildings used for offices that no longer are needed? Can we use the bones of that building and maybe get our price down a little bit more? I think you're going to see some of that, at least from our end. But really what we need is laws to be changed, and we need zoning to be changed, and we need your help for that. That's really where we need to look at, because I think it's, not the old, if you build it, they will come. I think we need the ability to build. And if we have the ability to build in those cities, you will see developers flood to those cities. I would love to build in Westwood, but there's the price point just puts it out of the reach for affordable housing developers, because I think all of us believe in, having equitable housing, and that means that the housing needs to be placed everywhere and not just in one corridor, and definitely not where there's already poverty. We'd like to see our buildings go up, in areas like Westwood, in, parts of the valley that we don't see any affordable housing. And I think we're all willing to fight for those, with all of, even through the NIMBYism and everything else. I mean, I built a, property in Newport Beach, and I know what comes with that. And it is a fight, but I think it's a fight we're all willing to take on if we can find a feasible way to do it. Brad, you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think just to kind of put a market rate spin on this conversation, you know, a market rate developer needs rent support for a project. The land price is not the big determining factor from my perspective, because you're paying $300, $400 per square foot to build the project. So if you don't have rent support in the community, you can't, as a market rate developer, afford to build in that community, because you're not gonna be able to lease the unit at a number that will get you a loan, right? And so the project stops before it even starts, because you can't get your first loan to buy the land, you can't get your second loan to build construction, you'll never get your perm loan because the numbers don't work, right? So the reason why housing diversity focuses on neighborhoods of high opportunity is because we need the rent support of that neighborhood to be able to allow us to build the project. We do focus on buy right projects. So TOC gives us a buy right entire permitting process, essentially, so that we get the high degree of confidence that we can get through the process. It puts us in the expedited permitting unit, which is a good thing. We get kind of a faster treatment through the permitting process. Speed to market and the ability to get a project done is really what it comes down to. And I think that this moment in time gives us an opportunity to maybe reassess how we work market rate with affordable housing producers to create a win-win for ourselves as developers, but also for the community at large. Because I can produce housing at a relatively low price because I'm doing it without any of the extra stuff that, you know, requires all those extra checks and balances, Brian, you alluded to earlier. So maybe there is a partnership, an opportunity for market rate innovators like myself to partner with forward-thinking groups like Skid Row to produce housing quickly and turn it over to operators that can operate it with the appropriate wraparound services, which I'm not set up to do. So maybe there is like a bigger moment here, and that this conversation could lead to, and that's my hope, is that, you know, these types of opportunities, and again, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this, to see if there's a future where we work together and use our strengths to our advantages and allow ourselves to grow faster and deal with this problem, this crisis, in a way that is collaborative, as opposed to everybody kind of putting up their silos and saying, this is what I do, what do you do? Oh, that's interesting, but we're really not working together to achieve it. So I hope that will happen one day.
Well, we're in.
Yeah. The more minds, the better. That's always
great.
All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen. I think you're on mute, Jen.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. So your conversation was absolutely fascinating. I was just on the edge of my seat listening to you, and am so grateful to all of our panelists and to you, Sierra. I know we have a couple of questions for Q&A. Before we get to that, I want to make sure everybody knows that our spring fundraising campaign will be starting tomorrow. And it's open the door to a second chance and help end chronic homelessness in Los Angeles. We have so many terrific things to share with you, most notably 4 phenomenal stories about residents who have just moved into floor 401 lofts and 649 lofts. So look out for those communications. We're excited to share them. And we typically have a call to action as part of these virtual community meetings, and there are 3 important ones today. And you can always make a gift to support our work and keep our residents housed. And we are going to be asking for advocacy on a couple of important projects in the next couple of weeks. We have applied for earmark funding, which is back for the first time in the federal budget for 13 years, both through Feinstein's office and through Congressman Gomez's office. And so we will be asking our supporters to, advocate for that funding for two really important projects to strengthen a limited partnership that needs some additional rehab, and then also to strengthen security across our entire portfolio and across the Skid Row community and the other neighborhoods we serve. And then the third opportunity is to join our mailing list. We want you to make sure that you're receiving invitations to virtual community meetings and to virtual building openings, and that we have a way to share our news with you. So if you're already on our mailing list, we'd love for you to ask a friend to sign up. And the first question is from our board chair, Simon Ha. Simon, would you like for me to read your question, or would you like to go ahead and ask it yourself?
Hi, Jet. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
All right, perfect. So, Faisal, you were talking about our opportunity to build along our corridors where we have a high level of service and transit. But, what we're fighting against is really the downzoning that happened in the 80s from Prop U. So interestingly, that happened right after the 84 Olympics in LA. Now we're getting ready to have another Olympics, and we're in a situation where we're really pressed for housing, and we need to produce 460,000 units of housing within City of LA in the next 8 years to meet our RENA goals. So is it time to repeal Prop U? And do you think there is momentum in the department, and I think in the part of our policymakers to let that happen?
As mentioned prior, I think the negative impact of Prop U has been felt for a long time, and it was something initiated by a popular vote. So the planning department was in a way had no way accepted to implement what came. However, we try to go well. We try to do some innovative way of encouraging housing development along those corridors, such as the RS3 and RS4, and then now TOC. But those are not enough, as a couple of the speakers said also. If there is an opportunity to revisit the limitation is built into the current C2 corridor oriented parcels and zoning, I think all the better. We are in an era where we are trying to revise several community plans, including the one in downtown, and although we finished the Hollywood, but we are starting West LA and South LA, West Adams, and those will come in line very soon. It is a very interesting point of discussion to start with the plan department and the city's policymakers, and I would call for open discussion on that.
Thank you, Faisal, and thank you, Simon, for the question. And I don't see anything else in the chat, but I do see that Michael Banner has his hand up. Michael, would you like to ask a question for the panel?
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you. Michael, it looks like you're on mute now. We could hear you, though, when you first asked.
Okay, so the last conversation with the question was about how do we not operate in silos. Sounds like a ecosystem conversation. And I'm wondering what everyone's experience has been about trying to, I guess, develop a strategy around a ecosystem conversation as it relates to these housing issues.
Sierra, I think that's really a perfect one for you. And then you may want to engage some of your guests also. And we're a little over time already, so this will be our last question.
Yeah, I think maybe Faisal, if you'd like to touch on that. I agree that it is an ecosystem issue, and that it's kind of the reason why we have the panelists that we have today, because it is a conversation that is going to involve everyone. We spoke from a developer's standpoint. Faisal speaking from a historical planning standpoint for the city of Los Angeles. And I think that, these are the types of conversations that need to keep happening. There are definitely people that we could add to this group to talk about a full service ecosystem, but you're hitting the nail on the head there with that question. Faisal, would you like to add to that, or Brad or Ryan?
Yeah, I'll quickly add and then leave it to the rest. I think I just will cite a very relevant example that we had in 2010 when we were starting the South LA Southeast Community Plan Update. Jan Perry and the council person for aid at that time hosted a community meeting at LA Tech, where they also invited all affordable housing developers around the city from all over. And some of the issues that really came up from the developers were some of the issues that we have discussed today: the challenges of acquiring land, the profit margin, the role or absence of role of the city in terms of supporting the sector. I think it may be, as we go into this discussion, and one of your efforts is we need to reconsider assembling and convening a citywide tripartite meeting, i.e. developers for affordable housing, the city family, and advocates for that sector, and then see if we can revisit that issue and tune up our technology and our discussion along that issue. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one, I know we're out of time, but just to kind of to add to that, I think that the opportunity is here right now for nonprofits and for-profit market rate developers focused on naturally occurring affordability to really kind of put our heads together. And let's not forget that naturally occurring affordable housing component when we talk about affordability, because I often feel a little bit left out of the conversation because there's this focus on affordable, like capital A, affordable housing providers. And then the people like me that are kind of often doing this kind of naturally occurring thing don't really get considered. And I think that we have a big role to play. And I think that it hasn't been really unlocked yet because we're thinking in silos. And if we start to think more as a system of housing, and bring the naturally occurring people, the people that are really focused on that missing middle, that there's might be a tremendous catalytic opportunity to unlock, it could be like a dam breaking, right, of opportunity. The number that Simon mentioned of 400,000 units in the next 10 years, it's going to take a dam break to solve that issue. And, we're here today to be a part of that, chipping away at the dam. So let's make sure we continue that momentum. And I, again, commend you for putting these meetings together. It's a really great way to get these conversations going. And, we'll definitely follow up. So.
Thank you, Fred. We're really glad you could join us today, and we definitely appreciate the engagement. We like to respect everyone's time, but it's always exciting when people want to keep the conversation going. So we are very grateful to our guests today and to our audience. And Sierra, thank you so much for moderating. That was just a really fascinating conversation. I think a lot of us could have continued listening for the rest of the afternoon. And we hope you enjoyed the presentation and conversation today, and we appreciate your making the time to join us. We hope to see you again next month. And for anyone who is not on our mailing list, the best way to receive an invitation to this meeting is to join it. So thank you so much, and we will see you next month.
Great. Thank you all.